So welcome to a solo show. Over the last 3 or 4 months, I've interviewed a number of people, and I'm always interested when you get a bit of a theme appear. And one of these is the idea of the imposter syndrome. I think this is quite a prevalent thing within the artistic community. And it doesn't seem to matter how good you are. There's always this idea that you're not as good as people think you are. And this has come up again and again. I wanted to start really with a quote to do with the feeling of guilt, because I actually think this applies is quite relevant to the whole problem of the imposter syndrome. So the quote goes, "The sense of guilt always generates scenarios related to punishment without you realising it. This is typical of the usual worldview. As soon as you notice the slightest trace of guilt, get rid of that rubbish immediately." That's a quote taken from Zadim Zeeland. And I think that is what I wanted to look at, is how we deal with imposter syndrome. So I've interviewed a number of creatives, and some of them are excellent musicians and artists, people well known as foragers, potters, storytellers, actors, and many of them feel like frauds waiting to be found out. And I was sort of drawn to this because I rather felt that myself as a teacher, that of course you can't possibly know it all, and there's certain areas of your knowledge and your playing that you feel slightly guilty about, that you're bluffing your way through it. And it's always that idea that sometimes teachers feel that they're only a few lessons ahead of the people they're teaching, which, quite honestly, is ridiculous, but that's often how you feel, particularly when somebody's good at a particular technique or something like that. So recently there were several guitar players and saxophone players who when asked to teach, panicked because they didn't know the theory, although they could actually do the stuff instinctively, but they just couldn't put a name to it. So they had to sort of go back and swat up in whatever it was that they were being asked. Now, these aren't just people that are good players, these are like world-class players. And one of them, this is a story that I heard from Sam Kelly, the drummer, was to do with Gary Moore. Gary Moore was concerned that, because he was obviously, apart from being an extraordinary rock guitar player, was actually quite good at playing jazz, but he wouldn't go out and play in a jazz combo, which was something that Sam had suggested, because he might be found out as being a fraud, which, I mean, is quite amazing. But this doesn't just sort of stop there. It also includes people like artists who failed at college and actors who bluffed their way into a stage role and stuff like that. And even like real sort of world-class drummers who were aware of better drummers, who they felt could have taken their sort of place, So the point is, where does all this originate? Well, my guess is that it's sort of a shadow cast by the education system and sort of meta programs of the expert from society and the media and all the rest of it. And the thing is that these people who are supposed experts, or the people who are teaching that stuff, maybe on paper experts, they got the qualifications. And that word, I think, is really quite telling, because that word, to qualify, really sort of locks into education, doesn't it? They're the ones who do well with qualifications, which are paid for from the education system, which is a self-financing machine, producing qualifications and self-perpetuating. And there was an interesting article I read once about education systems when the qualification isn't enough anymore. They produce another one. Now, you wouldn't get very far as a business doing that. You know what I mean? That you get somebody to buy the product, and if it's not good enough, you get them then to buy a more expensive product. So it doesn't quite work, does it? Yeah. So you're buying an upgrade because the one that you sold them originally didn't work properly. Interesting. And obviously for certain things we need qualifications, you know, to prove that somebody knows what they're doing. But in actual fact, if you think about it from the point of view of there are many things that people are getting qualifications for that actually they don't probably need. And this, particularly the arts, I would say. But it does sort of create sort of the ghost in the machine, sort of a mental state created by the system. And it literally infects everything. And this is where I think this is beginning to sort of fall into place. You know, you couldn't, you know, when I started off playing guitar, maybe in the UK, just trying to think about this, the University of Leeds probably had like a jazz course. Okay. But that was, nobody ever thought about that, you just got out and played. And you just got by all the sort of things that you did. Now, if you were entering into things, you probably consider that you would have to get some sort of training, go to a college course or something. But how do we really get to the point that you need to qualify as a rock guitar player? I mean, to me that seems a bit sort of ridiculous. But it isn't, of course, when you suddenly look at education again. We're back to that thing that you need to be qualified to do that. And what does it mean if you get a degree from Berkeley as a jazz drummer? You know, there's a sort of a inconsistency. Well, that's not the right word. Yeah, I can't think of the word. Anyway, but there seems to be something that doesn't match there. So creative people, of course, tend to be more sensitive, and something like a lack of perceived lack in their education can actually affect them. Although logically, it doesn't really make any difference, because if, like, for instance, if you're one of the great saxophone players or guitarists, which some of these guys that I spoke to actually are, knowing what a particular scale is doesn't make an awful lot of difference to your playing, really. You just actually know what you're doing. And also, a lot of really skilled people, their knowledge is subliminal. You know, they may have studied something and you sort of forget it. So this is one of the classic things in NLP, that when you speak to somebody who's really good at something, and you say to them, how do you do that? They say, I don't know. That's their first response. And then you have to sort of dig deeper and find out what it is they're feeling or whatever. So the feeling of not knowing is actually difficult to deal with, I think, for people that are sensitive, artistic people. So the sort of messaging that we're getting is that we need the qualifications to prove ourselves. So the beginning quotation, as I said, is this as true to the imposter syndrome as it is to sort of the feelings of guilt. That you're not as good as people think that you are. So to get out of this, let's have a look at a couple of techniques that might be useful. So this is sort of taken really from NLP. So first of all, you want to find about things that are true, I think, in this one. Because it's not really even just a case of developing confidence. It's about finding what you would say is true of you. So the best thing is to first of all is find out who you are. You know, what's your name? Where do you live and where did you grow up? You know, think about those things, say them, and then think about the resonance of that in yourself. And when you've got that, feel what that is in yourself, because it will be a feeling inside you somewhere. So if I say, you know, I grew up in Cornwall, and I lived there till I was about 10 or 11, to me it resonates in my chest. There's a feeling of certainty there. Whereas if I say something like, you know, I've got black hair, and which I haven't, that's sort of somewhere it's sort of in my head somewhere. It's not. It doesn't sort of anchor itself into my body. I'm going to be using that word again later as well. So be aware of where those feelings are. So it's sort of there in you. It's who you are. And then think about what it is that you do. You know, I'm a guitar player, songwriter, sort of creative. I podcast. I do other sort of crazy stuff. You know, I enjoy walking, all that sort of thing. Now think about those things. So when you say, you know, I'm a guitar player, does that resonate in? Right, okay. That does for me. So then to start to think about how good you are. Now certain elements of that resonates in the same place for me. But other bits don't. So if I said, you know, I play country guitar, well, I don't actually, and it doesn't sort of feel, you know, I could bluff my way through it, but it's not there. But if I was to think to myself and get that feeling back in myself about the truth, and say, I play country guitar, could I lock that in? And I could do that. I could get that feeling where it sort of locks in. So this is the type of NLP thing where you're putting things about yourself that you don't feel so confident about, but you could do in the same place. Now, the way you work with the anchor for this, you want to create a physical thing, a physical action. So, so you could do something like pinching your index finger and your thumb together, or middle finger, whatever, or a couple of fingers, right? That you do while you feel that original feeling of truth. So the idea is that you're associating the feeling of the truth and, you know, where it's you, your central thing, with a physical thing that you could literally do as, you know, physical action. So you repeat that a few times, thinking about where I grew up, who I am. Right? Now, think about something else. You know, so effectively, you shut that file down. You open another file up. Think about something that you did yesterday, something you had for, I don't know, for breakfast or something like that. And then come back and get the feeling, and I immediately get that feeling back in my chest again. This is what we're looking for, right? So when somebody says to you, what do you do? you can come from a sort of a sense of confidence instead of just thinking, well, do a bit of this, do a bit of acting. No, you're an actor. Now, there's an interesting quote from Alan Moore, he doesn't call it graphic novels, comic book writer. Or perhaps he does call them at one point graphic novels, I don't know. Anyway, he's talking about becoming a magician because he's sort of famed for being interested in magic. And he said that instead of having a midlife crisis, he thought he'd do something far more risky, which would be to become a magician. And the first thing he did was he decided that's what he was going to be. And as soon as you decide that that's what you're going to do, that's what you become. So here's an interesting thing about, what are you? You're an actor. When do you become an actor? Is it the first time you go on stage? The first time that you learn your lines? First time you get paid for being an actor? What is it? Maybe it's when you decide that you are an actor. Maybe that's when you become an actor. When do you become a magician? When do you become a musician? When do you become the guitarist or the drummer? When you decide that that's what you are. Because otherwise you're going to go, when are you a guitarist? How many chords do you know? That sounds a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? So you make a decision that that's what you are. So you could become a guitarist and only know 3 chords. Quite possibly. So a couple of other things that are good to do. This is really taken from the army. Train. Train so that things become innate. And then you learn to be able to do the innate things under stress, like being shot at. So if you know anybody who's got a gun who'd like to fire it over the top of your head, maybe that's useful, I don't know. I'm not suggesting that, of course. But it's also, beneficial to be aware of your skills and make a list of your strengths. And when you know what they are, by extension, you will know your weaknesses. Now, weaknesses can be very useful. Lots of very famous people had weaknesses that they didn't know an awful lot of things. Right? They didn't know a lot of chords. I often quote people like John Lee Hooker or Johnny Cash. There were limited things that they could do, but what they did in their way, and that's what made them successful. So sometimes your weaknesses are your strengths. But generally speaking, what we do with weaknesses is that we work on them. And you lessen their impact in that way. So in the army, that's the thing. You drilled, you did the drill. Like people when they fly an aeroplane, they have a checklist of things that they have to do. And that is a psychological thing of getting you into the mindset. Right, so I think a few things there, just to recap. Imposter syndrome is probably quite normal for people in the arts. Work on your weaknesses, know your strengths, but also develop the mindset, that mind space that you need to know who you are. And lock that into what it is. So in actual fact, you are who you are. We're going to be a bit zen here. And if you're an artist, that's what you're saying. You. Nobody knows that better than you. So nobody can be better than you, that being you. So let's have a look at that and work on that and see how that develops. There's lots of other self-help stuff out there. Obviously, you know, the internet's awash with them. But these are practical things that, you know, that you can, in a very short period of time, once you put those into action, and you know, just keep doing them. That's the same with all this stuff. It's, let's face it, practice. And if you are an artist, you're good at practice. So on that note, there are things in the show notes to take you to stuff like the Akaro Music Charity, which I'm doing, which is now picking up a bit of speed. We're giving away free instruments for kids to use. That's obviously in the UK. I can't ship them anywhere else at the moment. But you can certainly learn to songwrite and play the guitar with the stuff that we've got, and that's all available for free. So you can follow the links for that. The stuff about Blues Camp, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, songwriting, so that you're part of an album. That's also available through the show notes. Yeah, so until next time, I shall see you then.